Snow was falling heavily, and the cold wind seeped through the cracks in the window, rustling the newspapers on the table. Tong Fan Meng wrapped herself in the only quilt she had, shivering in the corner of the bed. There was a heater in the house, but it consumed too much electricity. She couldn't bear to use it and preferred to endure the cold. She used to have a cashmere blanket, but it got lost during the move. She had felt sad about it for a long time. With the cold this intense, she doubted she could sleep tonight. For several nights, Tong Fan Meng had endured the cold, rubbing her frozen feet and closing her eyes until dawn. She remembered she had some hot water left and shivered as she reached for the thermos. Maybe her hands had gone numb from the cold, and she accidentally dropped the thermos on the floor. She cried out, scrambling to pick it up. The thermos had a crack, but luckily the inner bottle was still intact. Tong Fan Meng laughed at herself. To think she was once extravagant and wasteful, known for her lavish spending, yet here she was, startled over a thermos. She had only had a bowl of porridge for dinner, and now her stomach was growling with hunger. Someone had once told her that if a person ate very little for a long time, their stomach would shrink and they wouldn't feel hungry. It was a lie, wasn't it? A newspaper was blown to the floor, landing at Tong Fan Meng's feet. The front page headline was about the Top 10 Singers Awards ceremony, with a third of the page taken up by a photo of Feng Jueqing holding a crystal trophy. Recently, Feng Jueqing had started acting in TV dramas. Although he didn't appear in many, the ratings were always high. The media commented that even a mediocre drama could become a hit with Feng Jueqing in it. Tong Fan Meng gathered the newspapers and placed them in the fire basin, lighting them for warmth. The warm flames licked the cold air, and Tong Fan Meng soaked in the heat greedily. But the papers quickly burned to ashes, leaving her wondering if she had ever been warm at all. The next morning, she received a call from Ma Junsheng, who spoke with a smug and arrogant tone. Fan, have you thought about it? Goosebumps rose on her skin, whether from the cold or fear. She couldn't tell. Seeing her silence, Ma Junsheng's laughter grew sharper. My new movie hasn't cast the lead role yet. You fit the bill perfectly, don't waste it. You're dreaming. She had endured hardships before and never thought a few good days made her a phoenix. Ma Junsheng had pushed her to this point, thinking she wouldn't last long. Tong Fan Meng secretly vowed that if she ever reached Feng Jueqing's level, she wouldn't let Ma Junsheng off. Ma Junsheng hadn't expected her to be so stubborn, so ungrateful, and he sneered. Acting so pure, as if you haven't slept with directors before. He expected her to react angrily, but over the years, Tong Fan Meng had grown impervious to such taunts. I have slept with directors, but it would never be you. After the sun came out, she took her quilt outside to air. She slipped in the courtyard, falling into the quilt. The thick snow on the ground cushioned her fall, so it didn't hurt. She didn't want to get up, burying her face in the quilt like an ostrich. In the courtyard, people began to wake up and move around, thinking that Tong Fan Meng had fainted in the snow. She worried about causing a commotion and quickly got up, saying, I'm fine, just fell. Girl, why are you airing out the quilt in this weather? The sun might be out, but the humidity is high. It'll get colder the more you dry it. Tong Fan Meng had no choice but to return indoors. The quilt, now lying in the snow, felt damp to the touch. She opened the window, hoping the wind would dry the quilt. Teacher Ding from the orphanage called her. Miss Tong, are you coming today? Xiao Feng has been looking forward to seeing you since yesterday. She remembered that Xiao Feng had frostbite on his feet, itching so much that he couldn't sleep at night. Finding 20 yuan in her wallet, she bought some frostbite cream and headed to the orphanage. Xiao Feng particularly liked Tong Fan Meng, crying inconsolably until Auntie Tong arrived and he immediately stopped. Tong Fan Meng washed Xiao Feng's feet and applied the cream. Xiao Feng asked her, Auntie, why don't you become my mommy? Other kids have aunties who become their mommies. Today, an auntie wanted me to be her son, but I didn't agree. I wanted to be Auntie's child. Auntie doesn't have money. When Auntie makes a lot of money, she'll bring Xiao Feng home. She didn't dare look up, fearing the child would see her teary eyes. The 2-year-old Xiao Feng shook her hand. Xiao Feng eats very little. Just a little money is enough to raise me." She couldn't hold back any longer, a tear falling onto her hand. Seeing her cry, Xiaofeng also began to cry. "Auntie, don't cry. Xiaofeng doesn't need Auntie to raise him. When Xiaofeng grows up, he'll take care of Auntie." She had bottled up too much pain recently. Once she started crying, she couldn't stop, like a floodgate had opened, and both the adult and child cried together. It took a while for them to calm down, and she managed to lull Xiaofeng to sleep before quietly leaving. Teacher Ding chased after her, saying, "Miss Tong, you forgot your phone." Tong Fanmeng walked back home, crying all the way. To save 4 yuan on bus fare, she walked until blisters formed on her feet. Under the lamp, she used a needle to pop each blister. In a daze, she accidentally pricked herself, causing her to wince in pain. Spreading out the quilt, she found it not only undried but also frozen stiff. She covered herself with it anyway, piling all her clothes on top, then placed a few books to weigh them down. She didn't dare move, afraid the books would fall, lying rigidly until her back went numb. She thought to herself that she couldn't go on like this. She didn't want to live another day like this. What the hell is going on? Where did these photos come from? Who did this? Agent Kai Jia was furious, juggling a call to Feng Juecheng while handling the constant ringing of phones in the studio. Feng Juecheng had just seen the newspaper. Being famous came with its share of scandals, and he had his fair share, enough to fill a book. However, this time it was different, serious, and with undeniable evidence. He looked at the newspaper with interest, 10 whole pages of photos. He was spinning her around. They were nestled on the couch drinking coffee. He was splashing water at her in the pool, kissing her forehead, tying her shoelace while squatting. It was him and Tong Fanmeng. A cold smile appeared on his lips. "Don't worry, the paparazzi will quickly find out who did this." He crumpled the newspaper into a ball, grabbed his keys, and left. His assistant hurriedly followed, reminding him about his schedule. He ignored them, driving straight into the main road. Finding Tong Fanmeng's place wasn't hard. First, she was exposed for attempting to seduce a second-rate director named Ma late at night. Then, due to not fulfilling her contract in time, she incurred huge debts and moved from her apartment to a dilapidated courtyard, struggling to make ends meet. The lock on the door was an old-fashioned latch from the 70s, secured with a thick rope. He kicked the door a few times, and it opened. Tong Fanmeng didn't come out to greet him, giving him ample time to survey the bare room. A table, a bed, a simple wardrobe, a suitcase in the corner, a small stool with a rice cooker on it, and a red thermos bottle beside it. Nothing else. It wasn't until a book fell off the bed that Feng Juecheng realized someone was sleeping there, and not just a pile of clothes and books. "So hot." Tong Fanmeng mumbled, her face flushed. The folding bed was low, and Feng Juecheng crouched to her level. He reached out to wake her, but her face felt burning hot at his touch. His hand was cool, and the contact felt soothing to her. Tong Fanmeng instinctively grasped his hand, unwilling to let go. Feng Juecheng pulled his hand back decisively and splashed a cup of cold water on her face. "Get up. Stop acting pathetic in front of me." She finally woke up, struggling to sit. Despite the fever, she didn't feel cold. Embarrassed to be seen in such a state, she bit her lip and said, "Do you not know how to knock when entering a woman's house?" There was a mirror by the bed, and from the corner of her eye, she saw her disheveled hair, swollen eyes, and feverish red face. She wished she could bite her tongue off. Sure enough, Feng Juecheng's disdainful smile appeared. "You look like this. Even if you strip naked in front of me, I wouldn't bother to look." A wad of paper hit her face, heavy enough to sting. He wouldn't come to her for no reason. She picked up the crumpled paper and slowly unfolded it. Feng Juecheng said, "Don't pretend like you don't know. Only you could do something like this." Tong Fanmeng was taken back to her memories by the photos. After a long while, she coldly said, "It wasn't me. Believe it or not." "I don't believe you." He enunciated each word. She lowered her head. Whenever she wanted to cry, she lowered her head, thinking others wouldn't see. But tears easily fell, landing on the cover of Dream of the Red Chamber, creating a watermark. When she confessed to him that day, she also lowered her head, her neck seeming ready to break. "I don't feel secure, always feeling like I could be abandoned at any moment. I don't want to be your plaything. I want to earn my own money. Only then do I feel safe." "You want to earn money, so you slept with Director Meng. Tong Fan Meng, are you a whore? You don't want to just do business with me, so you call that earning your own money?" It was the first time he hit her, 2 slaps hard enough to make her crash into the table, cutting her forehead. She silently endured it, almost admitting to the incident. Later, she starred in a TV series directed by Director Meng, not as the lead actress, but she had the 3rd most significant role. Just as she was gaining some fame, the paparazzi dug up the scandal with Director Meng. He saw her news in the papers one after another: third-rate actress, poor acting skills, using men to climb up the ranks. Feng Jueqing had paid her hush money, but in her desperation, she broke the agreement and used the photos to stir up more controversy. His rage grew, convinced that her seemingly pitiful demeanor was all an act to seduce men. She sat motionless on the edge of the bed, wearing a simple cotton nightgown. He grabbed the collar of her nightgown and yanked it down, buttons scattering, exposing much of her skin. "Do you want to be famous that badly? Go make a porn film. It's better than using my photos to gain attention." In front of him, she had no dignity left. Because she used to be his woman, not a girlfriend, just a woman. She had agreed to quit her job as his assistant, quietly staying in his golden house, and he had scornfully said, "I thought you'd take a few days to consider. Was becoming my assistant just a cover?" Women who enter the entertainment industry as assistants either want to become stars or want to become the woman of a star. Tong Fan Meng steeled herself, deciding to strip off her torn nightgown in front of him, followed by her pants, revealing she wore nothing underneath. Calmly, she changed her clothes, slowly putting on underwear. It didn't matter if she was at a disadvantage. He had already seen her body. Feng Jueqing finally turned his head away, cursing her shamelessness. "You're not here today just to humiliate me, are you?" She tried to stand up, but dizziness and a burning face overwhelmed her. Her forehead was scorching, and Feng Jueqing's face appeared blurred. When he no longer heard the sound of her dressing, he turned around, lifting her chin with one hand. "If you dare to speak nonsense to the media, I will ensure you never make it in the entertainment industry." As he finished speaking, Tong Fan Meng collapsed to the floor with a thud, unconscious. Feng Jueqing looked down at her from above. The wind howled through the broken window, and somewhere, snow fell with a plop. He clenched his fists tightly and left decisively. Wherever he drove, he saw Tong Fan Meng. At the newsstand buying mineral water, the magazines in the window had bold headlines like "Feng Jueqing and Tong Fan Meng's past relationship exposed." The giant screens in the plaza replayed the photos, accompanied by all sorts of speculation. In the photos, Tong Fan Meng smiled happily. He had a bad temper, often scolding her when she was his assistant. She seemed never to get angry, listening to his scolding with her hands behind her back, smiling serenely. One day, he called her to his room, and feeling that she liked him, he said without any reservations, "I need a woman to warm my bed, but I don't want to give the paparazzi any fodder. How about it? Quit your job and sleep with me until I get tired of you. Of course, I'll pay you." He made his words as harsh as possible, not wanting her to have any beautiful fantasies. She suddenly lowered her head, and he couldn't see her expression. He immediately added, "I'll give you a week to think about it." But she told him the next day that she was willing. He was busy with various engagements, and she spent most of her time alone in the apartment. He thought she would get bored, but she had her own ways of enjoying herself. Sometimes he found her busier than he was, feeding the dog, changing the fish tank water, watering the plants, watching idol dramas at a set time, playing online card games with netizens. Occasionally, she would sentimentally hug him and say, "Feng Jueqing, I'm very happy being with you." He would correct her, "We're not together." She would pout indifferently. He didn't know what kind of happiness he brought her. Props he brought back from film shoots, given to her as gifts, would make her laugh foolishly for days. Once, He gave her a piggyback ride, and she would sit up in bed at night and suddenly say, "Feng Jueching, you carried me today," and the like. He gave her just enough money to buy clothes and cosmetics. Initially, she didn't spend much, just exchanging for many coins, saving one each day in a piggy bank. Her antics didn't end there. She would insist on shaking it in his ear. "Feng Jueching, listen. So much money." After the paparazzi caught wind of him spending the night with a certain model, she asked him for money for the first time. At first, he didn't connect the two events, but later, whenever he had a substantial rumor, she would ask for money. Clothes, bags, diamond rings, shoes. She bought so much that it filled the wardrobe, yet he never saw her use any of it. But she kept buying, spending money like water. Feng Jueching slammed on the brakes, nearly causing the car behind to crash. The driver cursed him loudly. He turned the car around and headed back to the courtyard. Tong Fanmeng was already curled up on the floor. If he hadn't come back, she might have died unnoticed. He only took her to the hospital, paid the bill, and told the doctor, "I don't know her. I found her on the road." Kai Jia waited for him in the studio, furious. She first scolded him for missing engagements, then started berating him seriously. "I always told you to keep your distance from women, but you had to entangle with Tong Fanmeng. You didn't even clean up the mess. Don't you realize, if she tells the reporters you paid her for sex, your reputation will be ruined? She's a third-rate actress who only makes headlines through scandals." He replied indifferently, "You said it yourself. If you're going to play with women, play with one thoroughly, so the paparazzi can't find anything." I was very discreet. No one knew back then. But now everyone knows. Kai Jia yelled. "So what? They think it's a past relationship of Feng Jueching." He lit a cigarette nonchalantly, flicking the ash. "Tong Fanmeng won't say anything. I warned her." She released the photos. What else can't she do? The manager was exhausted. "Have you forgotten you have a child together? My God, how did I let this happen in the first place? It's a ticking time bomb." Feng Jueching's pupils constricted, and he spat out his cigarette. "Kai Jia, that isn't my child." In fact, Tong Fanmeng didn't know whose child Xiaofeng was, Feng Jueching's or Director Meng's. She had always been careless. When she found out she was pregnant, the fetus was already 5 months old. After moving out from Feng Jueching's place, she took a role in Director Meng's film. Inexperienced, she often stayed up all night memorizing the script and delving into the character. During that period, she couldn't eat or sleep well, and due to malnutrition, her pregnancy wasn't noticeable. Initially, she was determined to have an abortion, but the doctor said it was too late and risky. Resolutely, she signed the consent form for the surgery. The procedure lasted 3 hours, with severe bleeding. The doctor made the decision for her. The child had to be born. To this day, she remembers the pain and the constant flow of blood. The baby was kept in an oxygen chamber for a month after birth. He was smaller than a newborn kitten, and the hospital staff said he wouldn't survive 2 months. She thought it might be better if he died, to end her suffering. But Xiaofeng was stronger than any child, surviving against the odds, his frail limbs eluding death's grasp. Surviving didn't change the fact that she couldn't afford to raise him and had to send him to an orphanage. Director Meng asked her to film another movie, and she replied, "I slept with you once, and I'll only do 1 movie with you." Thus, she cut off her source of income. Later, she took on minor roles and posed as a cover girl. She never rose to fame, but managed to get by. 2 years later, she met Ma Juncheng. When she refused his demands, he retaliated by telling reporters that she had knocked on his door at night and tampered with the contract, leaving her with a massive debt. Tong Fanmeng had always been afraid of hospitals. Waking up from such a painful dream and seeing the white walls made her shudder. She borrowed foundation, eyeshadow, and lip gloss from the nurse, put on makeup, and checked out of the hospital against the doctor's advice. Feng Jueching was right. She shamelessly took advantage of every opportunity. She had leaked the photos herself. If those photos could only bring her painful memories, she might as well use them to gain an opportunity to rise. If he had experienced hunger and cold, he would know that promises were worthless compared to bread. Just as expected, paparazzi were lying in wait around the courtyard. As soon as she appeared, the flashlights kept flickering and numerous microphones were thrust towards her. Tong Fanmeng, what is your relationship with Feng Jueqing? Were you once a couple? Did you break up with Feng Jueqing 2 years ago because of the scandal with Director Meng? Who initiated the breakup? Tong Fanmeng didn't need to say anything. She just smiled slightly and turned her back on the media, leaving them to their rich imaginations. Thanks to Feng Jueqing, she made the headlines for several weeks in a row, stirring up quite a buzz. Gradually, advertisers contacted her, directors inquired about her contact information, and jewelry shows invited her to model. She was cast as the third lead in a new production, only to find out on set that the male lead was Feng Jueqing. Perhaps it was precisely because of this that the producer intentionally cast her. Feng Jueqing had clearly anticipated her participation and turned away coldly. Everyone around looked like they were watching a show. As a newcomer, she had no choice but to greet him, "Senior." He suddenly snapped at the stylist. "This outfit is too ugly, change it." Everyone knew he was referring to her, causing the leading actresses to cover their mouths and giggle. She had been scolded by him before, and far worse, but this was the first time in front of so many people, making it inevitably embarrassing. During mealtime, the crew gathered to eat their box lunches. Before she even opened hers, Feng Jueqing raised his and said, "Who wants to trade? I don't eat pork liver." The director immediately asked, "Who has sweet and sour ribs in their lunchbox?" Yes, she remembered he liked ribs and had even taken a crash course in cooking because of it. She had once tried to impress him with her cooking, but the pan ended up a mess. After tasting her cooking once, Feng Jueqing swore never to eat anything she made again. Originally, he liked pork liver, but because she refused to eat it, claiming it was dirty and full of toxins, he eventually stopped eating it too. Tong Fanmeng was lost in thought until the lead actress snatched her lunchbox. "I can smell the sweet and sour ribs." She handed it to Feng Jueqing, leaving the pork liver lunchbox in Tong Fanmeng's hands. She didn't just dislike pork liver, she loathed it. Yet this time, she swallowed piece after piece, just like the bitterness she swallowed every day. Unable to endure the taste, she swallowed whole pieces without chewing, choking and turning red. When no one was looking, she rushed to the restroom to gag, retching continuously. When she lifted her head, she saw Feng Jueqing in the mirror. She turned around, warily watching him. "Quite resourceful, aren't you? You finally made it to the ranks of second-tier actresses." He stepped closer and closer. "Do you still dare to say you didn't leak those photos?" She calmly replied, "I didn't say anything to the reporters." "What could you say?" "It was consensual. The only one who would lose face is you." He gripped her shoulders with such force it felt like he was about to crush them. Despite the pain, she refused to make a sound, biting her lip tightly. "Yes, you gave me money, and I warmed your bed. It was a transaction. You thought so from the start, and I haven't lost face just now. Why do you keep reminding me of this?" A spark ignited in Feng Jueqing's eyes as he placed his hands on the sink behind her, pressing his body close. She didn't know what he intended until he asked, "Want to play the lead role?" His actions and tone dripped with ambiguity. She tried to push him away, her hands just touching his chest when his lips came down hard. He kissed her forcefully, with a hint of insult. Instinctively, she kicked at him, but he pinned her legs with his teeth grazing her lips before suddenly biting down, breaking the skin, and then stopping. "Sleep with me, and I'll make you the lead actress." He licked the blood from his lips, watching as the color drained from her face. Tong Fanmeng finally mustered all her strength and slapped him. He laughed coldly. "I thought many people had said that to you, and you'd be used to it by now." He wiped his lips with the back of his hand in disgust. "What? Are you picky about who says it?" She pressed her lips together and walked past him. With a loud crash, Feng Jueqing punched the mirror. She didn't dare to look back, only hearing the sound of glass shattering. Feng Jueqing's hand was injured, but he refused to go to the hospital, letting the medical team handle it briefly. The next scene required a slapping sequence, where the lead actress slapped the third wheel twice in front of the male lead. Whether the lead actress felt responsible for Feng Jueqing's injury or she was simply very dedicated, the slaps landed hard. Everyone on set heard the crisp sound of the slaps. Tong Fanming's face swelled immediately, but she remained silent. The director, however, was dissatisfied with the realism of the scene and demanded a retake. With makeup reapplied and a thick layer of powder covering the swelling, they shot it again and again. On the fourth take, just as they began, Feng Jueqing suddenly walked out from behind the camera, threw his keys to his assistant, and said, "My hand hurts. I'm going to the hospital." With the male lead absent, the scene was postponed until the next day. Tong Fanming didn't want to go to the hospital, but the swelling on her face was too obvious to be concealed by any amount of powder. Under the director's strong insistence, she took the funds and headed to the hospital. Coincidentally, she and Feng Jueqing went to the same hospital, a city-level facility known for its high confidentiality and catering to celebrities. Afraid of running into him, she grabbed her medication and hurried out, only to encounter someone she dreaded seeing even more, Director Meng. Meng pursued her down the hallway, blocking her path. Understanding that she didn't like him, he stepped back but couldn't help reaching out to touch her swollen face. "Damn, is it Feng Jueqing?" She turned her face away from his hand. "During filming, it's all just acting. A bit of medicine will fix it. If you were working in my productions, you wouldn't suffer so much." He awkwardly withdrew his hand, feeling helpless around her. Tong Fanming smiled slightly. "Work in your productions? Are you suggesting we should go to bed again?" His face flushed suddenly, and he stammered an apology. "Sorry, I shouldn't have been drunk that day. It's fine. I'm not a virgin anyway." She interrupted him with a self-deprecating smile. Meng Shu's heart ached as he saw her head down, her slender neck seemingly fragile. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "I want to take Xiaofeng for a paternity test." She looked up sharply, staring at him as though he were her greatest enemy. "Over my dead body. Xiaofeng is 2 years old now. Do you want him to never know his father? I've said that even if he's not my biological child, I would still care for him. He doesn't even have a mother. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid he's my child or afraid he's Feng Jueqing's child?" His words struck her like a knife to the heart. Tong Fanming clutched the strap of her bag, her fingers turning red from the pressure. Meng Shu sighed, regretting his rashness, and walked away silently. Tong Fanming murmured to herself in a voice only she could hear, "I'm afraid that if the child is Meng Shu's, I won't even want to see him again, but if the child is Feng Jueqing's, I'll be entangled with him for the rest of my life." She slid down the wall to the floor, tears falling drop by drop. Through the gaps between her fingers, she saw a pair of black handmade leather shoes. Feng Jueqing stood there, his face hidden in the shadows of the light, making it hard to discern his expression. She didn't want to guess or hide her vulnerability. "I'm very tired. Please, if you want to humiliate me, come another day." To her surprise, he actually walked away. Tong Fanming was stunned. When she got home and looked in the mirror, she realized her face was swollen like a pig's, and no one would want to see it. After applying medicine and taking anti-inflammatory and painkillers, the burning sensation subsided. At night, she had to lie face down on the bed with her chin resting on the mattress. The next day, headlines screamed, "Certain actress uses filming as an excuse to slap Tong Fanming. Feng Jueqing injured on set, suspected of emotional distress. Feng Jueqing, Tong Fanming, and Meng Shu seen leaving the same hospital," and so on. Tong Fanming looked at the news and laughed. Her life had never been so lively, like a circus. On the way to the set, Teacher Ding called, saying that Xiaofeng had been taken away by a young man. Her first thought was Meng Shu, who had mentioned taking the child for a paternity test. Tong Fanming frantically searched her contacts and was about to call when Feng Jueqing's call came in. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the flashing screen, and picked up just before the ringtone ended. Feng Jueqing said, "I'm at the hospital." She responded with a simple, "Oh." Then he added, I'm bringing that child, Xiaofeng, for a paternity test. Tong Fanming's phone dropped to the floor. Feng Jueqing returned Xiaofeng to the orphanage. She sat in his car, holding Xiaofeng, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Xiaofeng clung tightly to her, tears still in his eyes from the blood draw and pain in his arm. Xiaofeng, like her, was afraid of Feng Jueqing. He insisted on laying everything bare under the sun, not giving her any chance for illusions. Her grip tightened, her knuckles white, as she set Xiaofeng down at the orphanage and left. Xiaofeng cried desperately behind her. Onqi, Onqi. He thought she was abandoning him, and indeed, she had never claimed him as her own, not even allowing him to call her mom. Feng Jueqing quickly caught up with her, grabbing her. How can you be so heartless? Don't you hear him calling for you? Then he asked, why does he call you auntie? She tried to pull her hand away inch by inch, but he held on tighter, his voice harsh. Since you had the audacity to give birth to him, why don't you have the courage to admit you're his mother? She turned to look at him, slowly saying, do you think I wanted to give birth to him? What kind of life have I led? Would I want him to live like a ghost with me? It's my fault if you despise me. Why do you keep disturbing him? Even if we're mere ants, we still have the right to live decently. Looking at him, his pupils seemed to narrow into a line, shimmering like a cat's eyes. Her wrist felt almost broken as Feng Jueqing said, I'm only afraid that one day, you'll use the child for publicity. I won't. She spoke earnestly and calmly. Someone who doesn't even know how to cherish themselves, how can they say they won't? He sneered, forcefully pushing her down onto the ground, looking down at her. If the test shows he's my child, I'll take him away. She weakly asked, and if not, we're done with each other. Feng Jueqing realized that this was an endless torment. It wasn't until he heard Tong Fanming and Meng Shu's conversation in the hospital that he understood the matter stemmed from Meng Shu's drunken state. Perhaps he had always subconsciously known she wasn't that kind of woman, but he was unwilling to accept it. The more she tried to sever all ties with him, the more he clung to her, humiliating her time and again. He was shameless, unwilling to exit her life and resorting to such cruel methods to maintain their connection. He couldn't admit that he loved her. He lost control in front of her repeatedly, cursing viciously, because he couldn't accept that she didn't love him. She didn't love him. They had agreed that he would leave only when he was sick of her. Yet she left him for a flimsy reason, claiming a lack of security. In the many days after she left, he often sat on the sofa smoking through the night, afraid to sleep, as dreams would vividly reflect his longing. Sister Kai pounded on the door outside. He was too lazy to answer. She had ways to find the key. Sure enough, she got in soon enough, her anger burning fiercer than when Tong Fanming's photos were exposed. Are you crazy? Do you know that there are paparazzi everywhere around you? And you actually took that child for a paternity test? Is Tong Fanming not enough to ruin you? She launched into a tirade, accompanied by a stack of magazines and newspapers thrown at him. He extinguished his cigarette and suddenly said, it was I who ruined her. This left his manager stunned, unable to continue her scolding. I've been so famous for so many years. If the heavens want to take back my glory, I'm willing to accept it. Everyone was waiting for the result. The identification center was packed to the brim early in the morning. It was such a valuable news piece that securing it meant a year's worth of stories. A sea of reporters and microphones. With each step Feng Jueqing took, the crowd of people retreated. Holding the identification report, Feng Jueqing politely said, I need to show this to Tong Fanming. Please make way. His car sped down the road, with the media chasing closely behind. Tong Fanming watched the live broadcast. His car sped like a predator on the highway. She dialed his number, her voice trembling. Just tell me over the phone. I want to show you the report in person. He had never spoken to her so gently before, not even during their best times. When he spoke harshly, Tong Fanming fell silent, only the sound of her rapid breathing on the phone. If he began speaking again, I mean, if Xiaofeng is my child, would you be willing to come back to me? There was a prolonged silence on the line. Tong Fanmeng moved to the window, looking at the traffic below from her newly moved-in place. In the distance, she could already see Feng Jueqing's car, with the paparazzi still trailing behind. She whispered, "We can't go back." A loud crash suddenly echoed on the phone. At a curve, Feng Jueqing's car collided with a truck. She watched as his car was flung into the air, tumbling several times before sliding far away, its wheels spinning in midair. Tong Fanmeng could still hear his voice. "Fanmeng, say it again. I didn't hear you clearly." "I said I'm willing." She covered her mouth to muffle her crying, but her voice was laced with sobs, which he could clearly hear. "Why do you cry so much?" He spoke softly, as though from a distant place. "You used to laugh so much. Your laughter had a shallow dimple and a tiny tiger tooth. But I haven't seen you smile in a long time." Tong Fanmeng forced a smile. "See, I'm smiling." He was trapped under the car, unable to see anything but the identification report with its final figure of 99% written after a mountain of text. Struggling, he tore the report apart. Each movement brought him severe pain. Finally, the report was shredded beyond recognition, and he smiled weakly. "Feng Jueqing, Feng Jueqing." She called out to him, "Say something." His fading consciousness gathered a bit. "Tong Fanmeng, listen." He raised his voice slightly, though it still sounded faint. "The report says Xiaofeng is not my child. He is your and Meng Shu's child. Not only did you betray me, but you also had a bastard." She could only cry, unable to speak. The phone slowly slipped from her hand, but his words weren't finished, and the phone fell behind her waist, with the smell of gasoline growing stronger around her. He struggled to turn his head, trying to bring his mouth closer to the phone. "Fanmeng." He called her again. "Tell me, did you ever love me?" Boom. The explosion shook Tong Fanmeng, and the fire soared into the sky, reflecting on her tear-streaked face. "I love you. I have always loved you."